Good evening, friends. On this second day of this joint program with IIA, I welcome all of you to the first session of second day. We have, eminent speaker CA Chetan Thakkar who will be, talking on the topic of culture in internal audit, auditing culture rather. Internal audit per se, we have been saying that the entire practice areas are shrinking. Like today, we reduced the GST audit by the government. There are changes in the tax audit. Limits have increased, and small and medium-sized practitioners are, hoping a good area of practice in future as internal audit. And I think this is right time when ICAI, WIRC, we have, huge good resources and support of internal audit entire team of Mumbai chapter, and that's the greatness of IIA Mumbai chapter, that they are ever ready to support such program and give their expert speaker on the internal audit. So Percival, thank you for always being supportive in these educational work of ICAI WIRC, which we try and conduct good such program for our members. Friends, before Chetan Bhai starts, formal introduction of CA Chetan Ramji Thakkar. Chetan is a fellow chartered accountant. He has done, to his credit, there are various courses which he has learned. He's undergone a various sort of training. Few of them I'll say. He's done a strategic leadership program from IIM Ahmedabad in 2019. He did his EMBA from Harvard Management Mentor in 2016. He has done certification course in risk management in 2011. He has carried out CIA, that is Certified Internal Auditors program from USA. He's done diploma in information system audit, DISA, in 2005. His brief professional background, he has, to his credit, 25 years rich experience of conducting various type of audits. He has carried out statutory audits of large listed companies like Grasim, Indian Rayon, Aditya Birla Group companies, ONGC, L&T, ACC, CG, Blue Star, Air India, New India Assurance, State Bank of India, ICICI. I think, entire huge companies are being audited in his career of 25 years. Exim Bank, BOI, BOB. He has served, in CA firm and listed companies into various capacities, holding high positions as director, associate vice president, general manager. Presently, he is working in GSW as AVP, group head of audit and risk assurance for the cement, energy, and mining vertical. He has been handling almost 13 plants in India and UAE also. He's a regular speaker at IASB, IIA, ICAI, BCA, and he's also professionally associated with all these professional bodies. He has been, part of training program of Big Fours and B schools. He's very active in IIA India Bombay chapter. He's in chair of advocacy. He's in vice chair of membership training and webinar committee. He's expert on internal audit, and when we think of some such unique topic which he's going to take up today, we are very sure that next 1 hour is going to be very, very interactive, and we'll have a lot of learning on this topic of culture in auditing. In fact, what Chetan is going to talk, I've gone through the presentation, but be it as maybe, I'm not going to talk about that, as we will listen from him as expert. But I personally believe, yes, it's audit culture or your roots where you learn this auditing in initial year of your career, the work office environment, the work style in a firm where you take training are the your roots which shapes up a human being. And I was fortunate and happy to share that I and Chetan, we did that training in the same firm. We learned where we learned this audit culture very, very diligently. And before Chetan starts, Chetan bhai, just 2 minutes, we have our vice chairperson CA Drashti Desai. I'll request Drashtiben to address the gathering for 2 minutes, and then we can start a talk of Chetan bhai. Drashtiben, please.
Sure. Thank you, Chetan bhai, and thank you, Chetan bhai, for being here with us. First of all, I don't want to take much of your time because audience is here to listen to you because internal audit and it's a very, very important function. And now the reporting also is quite, I think, onerous on chartered accountants. It's very important just not write the line about financial controls being in place, but also one has to really do enough justification to write that one sentence in the report. So people are here to listen to you. I don't want to take too much time, but just a few things I just want to talk about. One is that on 1st February, on the day of the finance bill, which will be tabled, we are going to have a live streaming of the budget at WRC, and we are also going to have initial thoughts, the immediate thoughts on the budget from GST expert, income tax expert, and we'll also have on the market. So that's going to be a new flavor that we're going to get this time. That we're going to have somebody, he's a very, a person with great knowledge, and he will share the market impact, what he perceives on the finance bill. So please do join us on this live streaming, and also if you can come physically and come and hear them or virtually join for the their initial thoughts, and that will be great learning for everyone. I think that's about it. Over to you, Chetan bhai, to take the proceedings forward. Thank you, and
Thank
I
you.
will be very happy to listen to today's session.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Drashtiben.
At the outset,
Chetan bhai, Percy, any comments from you, opening remarks or something?
No, thank you. So I had my opening remarks the other day. So I would also not like to, stand in between Chetan bhai and waste valuable time for the participants. So over to you, Chetan bhai.
Chetan bhai is
thank you
trying to tell that we can have the session interactive, so the participants, if they have question, they can put it in chat box, and we'll try and make it interactive. Let it be two-way communication. Over to you, Chetan bhai, all yours.
Thank you so much. At the outset, thank you to WRC team, Drashtiben, Murtuza, Manish bhai, Chetan bhai, and from my team, Rachna, Percy, for giving me the opportunity to share my views on this non-traditional, non-conventional topic, auditing culture, which is very less talked about and something very unique. And frankly speaking, being 1 hour speaking on this would not suffice. This I can speak for this hours and hours a day together. But I will take this session since it is for small and medium enterprises. So I will make it very simple, very basic. But I will try and connect as much practical example, practical insight as I can. So thank you, friends. I'll just start my presentation, please. Thank you all of you once again. Is it my screen visible to you all?
Yes, it is visible.
Is it?
Yes, we can.
Yes, fine. Yeah, friends, thank you so much. So, friends, let's set the tone. So, what's all about this culture? In order to succeed, any organization, may it be small, medium, or large, need a business strategy. So, strategy is something to success any organization. So, what we need in strategy, we need two things. What organization is seeking to achieve? That's on one part. So, and the most important part is how it is going to achieve it. That's all about culture. So setting strategy, any set of big or small strategy is not, it's just something very easy. Anybody can set that strategy. But what is more important basically is to set the tone. Just a moment. Yeah. So most important, how are you going to execution of that strategy is most important, and that is what we are going to talk about as a culture. Just a moment. This slides keep getting. Yeah. So internal audit primarily acting as eyes and ears of the board of as a board of directors. They are independent, and the reporting is to audit committee chair, and they are independent to the management. So we are, as an internal auditor, are in a unique position to judge and advise where the tone at the top is being adhered to across the organization. So it is essentially important where the tone is being, and we speak the same language all across organization. Richard Chambers, who is the ex-CEO, immediate ex-CEO and the president of IIUS, said, culture is what? Culture is how we do things around here. It is something, the way we do our things as if nobody is watching, how ethical and how we are in our conduct. So that is all about the culture, rightly said by Richard Chambers. In simple word, auditing culture is, in internal audit language, is assessing control environment of organization. So that is one of the first component of COSO Internal Audit Framework 2013 integrated framework. That is, this is the framework which widely globally adopted by all across internal auditor globally, not only in India. So that's the first set of component. So you have to assess any internal audit do any area, may it be production, may it be marketing, may it be fixed asset, any set of things. You have to first assess the control environment. So we talked about the culture today. So let's understand some realities, some myths. Culture is everywhere. Culture is everyone's responsibility. And it is everybody's lives. Everybody talk in office, may it be a firm, may it be company, may it be firm. And let me tell you, friends, culture is not one man responsibility. It is not the responsibility of board only, not only even the top management. It is everyone. Every employee is responsible to have a good conduct and a good culture. Everybody is responsible, including board. One cannot ignore it. Culture is complex. Yes, friends. So there is no universal definition in the business context to the culture. It touches the most intangible. So friends, that's why you see even my tagline of the topic, we are going to discuss culture is very invisible, intangible. So I will make an attempt along with your friends. We'll try and see how culture being intangible, we try to make some intangible out of it and we make audit out of this. So that's what we'll talk about next 45 minutes on this. Culture is subjective. We have our own views on the culture. So everybody has fixed different language for a culture. So we all have to come on the same page. Culture is contextual. Culture changes in the lifestyle of companies and is affected by macro environment, industry, country, etc. Culture is not a risk culture. See, culture is a broader term. Risk culture is one of the component of culture. So culture is a wider macro term and risk culture is the micro term. And culture is not integrity. See, integrity and ethical is a different thing, and the culture is different thing. Again, culture is again a bigger term. Culture is not conduct. See, these are two different things. I will take through the differences between two in my slides to come ahead. And culture is not static. See, culture is evolving. It is not static. With the organization, it never set for the entire business life cycle. So it is evolving subject. It is not static. So friends, I will take an attempt to appraise you about the reality and some myths about the culture. So as the friends we discuss, sometimes we say we talk about culture, conduct. Sometimes we mix up two things. Friends, basically conduct is more visible. So which is visible, which can be tangible, which can be seen in our behavior, decision, and action. And as I told you, culture is basically the value system, the behavior of the employees, top management, board, how we set the values, a kind of policy we adhere to, how you take the business decision. So sometimes it becomes very invisible. Culture is basically a very invisible term. So let's make an effort to see that how we'll make audit of this. So it is more focused on values, behavioral term, belief system, and preferences. Let's understand in a greater detail in slides to come. So friends, if your culture is toxic culture is very, I will come back to some of the large to very large, not only in India, even globally. If there is no right culture, even Peter Drucker, a very famous person, said culture eats strategy for breakfast. See, if you have no right culture, the very first slide we discussed, what business needs to success of business, we need a strategy. But how to execute that strategy, we need a solid good culture. So if you're we have a many even organization, large organizations, Tata's, Birla's, this company have raised so much. Those are become the top 2 companies, India and global ranking, because of the right culture of some of these companies. I don't want to name out more companies, but it is the culture, ethical values, the beliefs, how they take care of their employee, how they take care of their various stakeholders, make them today a more successful organization in India and globally. But if your culture is not right, it will take up your strategy will definitely go for heavy, and there won't be any chances of success of those strategy. So we need a solid, strong acceptable culture. If culture of organization is toxic, it erodes the effectiveness of all other layers. What may be the best control policy you have documented, maybe the world-class policy procedure, but if your culture is not correct, if the tone at the top, see, culture is basically not only tone on top, it may also bottom, but essentially it comes from tone at top. So if your tone at the top is very solid, if they have ethical value, which is dismantled to the all across the organization, certainly that will enforce a better culture, and there is 101% chances of company to grow, perform, and to better perform and better govern company. So let's understand culture, how it impacts. Friends, let's take some of the example. Even now, see, this is in the public domain, so I can take name. In India also, we have, because of the bad culture or unethical values, a kind of bad management, how some of the large to very large company, even in India, you take Satyam, today you take ILFS, some of the banks like PNB, globally, you know, the cases which are very popular, world.com, Enron, these are billions and billions, the largest of large corporates have failed because of only and only the cultural and ethical values they followed. Toshiba, Groupon, FIFA, Wells Fargo, there are many examples to this. I thought of just take a few. So friends, how it is, if your culture is not right and you are not setting the right tone, Enron, the shareholder lost 74 billion USD. Friends, yes, you heard it right. Because of the ethical compromises, a cultural compromises, the shareholder lost 74 billion USD. And Enron case, this is very popular globally. I'm sure one and all must be aware about this case. World.com, it has inflated its asset by 11 billion tons. So that is again they compromise on a window dressing, on a cultural front, on financial reporting. And you can see the market value also dropped from 180 billion to 350 million, friends. 180 billion USD to 350 million. You can see how a big, I will say a very, very big company like Enron, World.com have dropped and they came to end with a very no time. So because they follow a bad, their top management has not followed the right ethical approach. So which makes such a giants world.com, and I'm not getting into this slide for all of you for a future reference. So I may not necessarily go line by line or word by word. We'll take through the essence of every slide. So there are other examples, Volkswagen, Satyam we discuss, ILFS we know what has happened. Satyam being who received the corporate governance award when it is launched in 2009, and immediately after that, unfortunately, Satyam also because of the, you know, the how the even auditor has been penalized, statutory auditor, internal auditor, because they were also some way party to this, helping hand to the top who had window dressing on the financial fixed deposit and other things. No, it is in public domain. So you know what I'm trying to express. So culture is how important. Somebody else 180 billion USD like World.com, it collapsed in no time. Today, nobody even talked about what is World.com and Enron. And once a time, they were the biggest of big. I will not say they are big company. They are biggest of the big company across the globe. So, if a bad culture, your company, not only your top management, your board, everything will come to end with no time. And to have us, and we have many examples. Even in India, we spoke few names, Birlas, Tatas. Why people prefer to work for Tata? Why the anything, any product or any service we talked about, for example, Tata, we have a very, very high regard. Why? It's not only because of the better product or better quality product, it is because ethical value. The culture at Tata's has been taken with the high respect. So each and everyone, all the stakeholders, not only employees, customer, vendors, all across the stakeholders, regulators, bankers, whomsoever deal with such a good government, good conduct, good culture company, people would love to, and this company is definitely prosperous. We have numerous examples for the same. So friends, I'm just, and let me know any question anybody has in between. I would like to take a pause and let's have a more interactive. So friends, culture causes, how the culture basically, the bad reasons which culture collapse and the scam happen, or there is a failure of the large to very large corporation. Unethical leadership. If leadership itself is unethical, nothing much can be happened with that company. That company may grow in a short run, but it will not able to run for a long. So unethical leadership is a red flag. Corruption. If there are people under and above the line, if they are corrupted people, cultural will definitely make a compromise. Poor risk management, this is again a red flag indicator. Suspicious accounting, window dressing, conduct issues, poor governance. We have seen the example in the previous slides, how such a large corporates have collapsed with no time, and today the names are just becoming history. So friend, how does it looks like? It talk isn't the talk, it is a talk which has not been talked. Something is said, but something else has been done. They talk in a very a big way in a public forum, but when actually the back doors, these stakeholders, the top management behave differently. So what is being talked is not being walked. Blaming, there is a blame game at every time. There is a blame game. There is no ownership, unethical, illegal behavior, poor communications. See, these are all red flags. And what big company you may be today, but if you have these unethical cultural values in your company, sooner or later the company, there is nothing else will happen to that company. In a short time they may gain, they may perform, they may grow, but with the immediate that it's going to collapse. Different standard for a different people. I think that will not work. People will not appreciate different standard for different people. Groupthink and judgment. So friends, I'll take through few cultural reflex. Nobody's talking about culture, contravention deal, the lack of financial discipline, window dressing, employees under continuously fear, the how overall cultures. If some company employees are always on their toes, they are always constantly feel that they may get fired. They are obligated to do something they know which is not ethical, not in the view of they are getting fired. So this bad culture will definitely the most asset of the any corporate is employee, and if they are not happy with the bad culture, I think company has a very limited way to grow. The lack of knowledge sharing among employees, there is no knowledge sharing. These are some red flags. Pursue disconnect between words and action. That's what I discussed sometime before. The owners talk in a very loud way in the with a very big words in the when it comes internally, their behavior is something different. So they don't walk the way they talk. Risk management controls are taken at very convenience, just a checklist approach, just mere compliance. They doesn't want to follow the things in spirit. They want to just follow in a form. So that is missing. These are few red indicators which gives you trigger. We as an internal auditor, what best company is, if they don't follow a right value, right culture, right ethical values, the company will have a difficult time to come. So friends, let's come important. See, there are different ways to do the audit. The culture audit is something, it is not that as easy. It is a complex subject. A very few, let me tell you, to my experience last 25 years into an audit, I have seen very few companies, at least in India, see foreign, European country, US companies, especially financial and banking companies, there is a regulatory framework. So culture audit is the mandatory under regulation. But to my mind, in India, internal audit is definitely a mandatory under section 138. If you have those threshold ones breached, even private company, public limited company, listed company, it is mandatory. Auditing culture is currently not mandatory, but it is something a very non-conventional. It is not that. So we will try and talk in a very basic way how best auditing culture audit can be done by we as an internal auditors. So there are different formats. So I will take through the few formats how to do culture audit. First, you go through the culture framework. So just look at whether they have a policies, whether all the important policies all across HR policies, your manufacturing best practice policies, your marketing policies. So whether all critically important policy. See, policy is nothing but the tone which is being converted into policy, and procedure which is the execution. So policy suggests how serious your top management, your senior management is all about, and how these are the strategy statement converted into policy, and people at large has to follow in terms of policy and procedure. So whether that is being properly documented and follow in spirit, whether company has a code of conduct. See, there are set of code of conduct rules which set the tone, how serious of taking gifts, how to handle vendors, taking any gifts from vendor, not to take kickback from customers, not to take certain gift values, how to conduct when you regulator, no kickbacks, no bribery to be given while you getting into income tax, sales tax, or any other government or law when you're handling those companies' affairs with these regulators. So this sets about the code of conduct. So this shows whether do the company have that. See, our job is to assess. When you do the audit, you have to assess whether do the company have that. If the company have that, then you can conduct the audit. If the company don't have that, then you have to conduct the audit. So this is the Hello.
Sir, बोलिए, continue, sir.
Yeah, so I'm extremely sorry, friends. Somehow because of the network issue, all of a sudden I was disconnected for a couple of minutes. My apology for the same. Yeah, so friends, we were talking about the first set of strategy, how you can do a culture audit. Am I audible right now?
Sir.
I'm audible, Ketan bhai?
Sir,
Okay,
yes,
fine,
sir.
fine. So the first set of
Yeah.
strategy, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and my apology also for the disconnect for a couple of minutes. So friends, we'll see how auditing culture framework. So we'll look at the code of conduct we discussed. We talked about the policy, whether company has a strong risk management framework, do they have a whistleblower policy, do they have a prevention of sexual harassment. So basically, you will do a overall framework. So that gives us the guts feeling and at least have initial assessment whether company has got the right culture. Second, you may do a cultural assessment. You can do a survey, send across the people inside the company, top, middle, your people at the bottom. Take the survey, get the feedback, how they perceive. We as a management think the culture is something best. They are delivering the value to the all across stakeholders. But the same thing has been pervasive all across. So let's have surveys, have a face-to-face interviews, have a questionnaires, and try and get have a great place to work surveys. I think this will give you the assessment. And other way to look, you integrate cultural aspect in each and every audit. May you do production, marketing, financial reviews. Make this first, you make an assessment on the soft control on this front, and then try and understand how those soft controls are aligned with the audits which other post audits you have done. So this will give you the assessment. And third thing is you will do a
Chetan bhai, I think again you are not audible.
Thakkar also, sir.
Will you able to give me slide sharing rights, please? Hello.
Yeah, Chetan, my voice is coming now.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. Somehow I don't know
No, it's fair. We
today
can
some
continue.
network issues come, but yeah, please.
Fair, we can continue.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please. I just sorry for my apology. Somehow the network is not supporting today. Yeah, so friends, am I audible and screen is visible now? Is the screen visible
Yes,
now?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we were talking about whether than doing a holistic audit approach to the risk culture, we may divide the audit into a part. We can do a culture risk assessment audit or culture cyber audit. We discuss. We can understand the how culture is, how serious organization is about a fraud culture audit, how serious about whether there is a zero harm policy, or whether how serious about the injury or fatality happened to the any of the workers, how serious management is all about. So that set the tone. How we serious about the safety culture, compliance culture. Are we only doing a compliance, or are we very really serious about the compliances, or we are doing only checkbox compliance, or we are following in the spirit? How we report to the regulator? Are we very serious? Are we contributing in with the right spirit? So that's all about the compliance culture and conduct culture.
Chetan bhai, again we lost you. Friends, I just spoke to Chetan bhai. He's joining in a minute. He said that some technical problem which otherwise he was never facing, but this time, sorry for the inconvenient cost to you. He'll be joining in a minute. Friends, I'm sorry. Chetan Bhai is having some technical problem and we're not able to connect him. In fact, there are few slides which he had to cover, maybe another around 5 to 10 minutes. But I just spoke to him again and he regretted. He said he's not able to join because of some problem in his laptop. I'll request Awais to propose a very well-deserved vote of thanks, and friends, rest assured we'll share this PPT with all of you, and if you have any question also, maybe we can get it connected with the speaker. Once again, we regret the inconvenience caused to you, and I'll request Awais to propose a very well deserved vote of thanks. Awais, please.
Thank you so much, sir. We were all eagerly looking forward for this session. I think technology definitely is an hindrance whenever we are expecting something great. But more or less, I think culture eats strategy for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. And I think very important point where he left us during the discussion is integrating cultural aspects into various audits which we currently do. And he mentioned about integrating it into the soft and hard controls, bringing these elements through various surveys, interviews, workshops, feedbacks, questionnaires, identifying the culture aspect into cyber risk areas, fraud risk areas, compliance areas. I think overall various strategies which has been suggested by Chetan. By I think we, on behalf of the entire forum present here, I want to extend my gratitude as well as thanks to Chetan Bhai for this entire session. Looking forward to hear him again more on this topic. Thank you, sir.
We can move to the introduction of the second session speaker. He is already with us.
All right, sir.
Yeah, Ameya is here.
So, friends, good evening. Next topic is a fairly intense workshop, 2 hours workshop, which we are looking forward for on the topic of affordable development of technological tools to assist internal audit. We have the founder and trainer at FinQuest Institute, Mr. Ameya. Mr. Ameya is an engineer by graduate, has done his MBA in finance, holds a certification around CFA and CQF. He is a teacher by heart and has also worked for corporates, have a lot of experience around consulting, training people in the domain of risk management, probably he also have a very good expertise around GARP and FRM and teaching students around derivatives, credit risk management, all those areas of financial modeling, designing tools and valuations. So looking forward for a very deep down hands-on training. Mr. Ameya, welcome to the forum. Looking forward for it. Thank you. Sir, I'm not able to hear you, sir.
My apologies. Yeah. So firstly, thank you, sir. Thank you for the introduction. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, great. All right. So welcome everyone. So firstly, thank you for inviting me for our discussion today, and we'll be discussing an important and an interesting topic. So yes, I mean most of us in the forum are from an accounting background. So yes, you are experts on the accounting side of things. So maybe this presentation would be geared towards discussion of how exactly technology tools can help in the internal audit or even in the broader audit space in general. And we'll specifically talk about open source technologies because that is something which is gaining a lot of traction, and there are a few benefits to open source which we'll talk about in the due course. And the way in which I've structured today's discussion slides are the first half is introducing us to the technology which we'll be talking about. So we'll focus on Python because Python is an industry leader when it comes to anything from modeling, model validations, reporting, or even any process automation. So we'll spend some time understanding nitty-gritties of Python. We'll not go into too much of technical details. I have kept it light on the technology side, but at least having an idea of what exactly is the tool which we are planning to discuss. That will give us further motivation to discuss use cases. So I've put together a few use cases in the end as well, whereby I've prepared small demos as to using Python, how we can actually streamline a few activities which we commonly observe in internal audit. And my request will be maybe we'll keep this as an interactive session. So so maybe after every slides we can take take questions if any, so that we don't have to wait till the end. And many a times it happens that a concept which was discussed on slide number 1 could have a reference on slide number 3. So in case there are any questions on that first concept and relating it to the next concept will be difficult. Of course, it's not very difficult as such, but I generally prefer to take questions along the way so that we don't have to leave anything to the end, and also we don't have to forget any questions which we have in mind. So with that, let's begin. So these are a few points on the agenda for today's discussion. And so PPT will be the main points which will guide us through the discussion. And I've prepared small examples on what we call as a Jupyter notebook. So I'll talk a bit about Jupyter as well. So that is where I can show simple hands-on activities. So I've developed a few examples which we'll walk through subsequently. So sir has already introduced me, but a quick introduction slide about myself. So my name is Ameya and I run my firms. So I mainly focus on financial training, which I do through FinQuest Institute. And I do risk consulting for my industry network, which I do through expert consulting. So these are the two firms which I currently run by myself. And the training is mainly focused on finance, quant analytics, and using technologies for financial applications. Along with that, we do corporate trainings and also train candidates who are taking FRM exams, which is financial risk management. And under consulting, I mainly consult on model development, model validation, financial instrument valuations, anything on process optimization side, or tech implementations on financial domains. So those are a few services which we offer as a part of consulting services to the network. And my experience in the industry, so I spent close to 13 years in financial services, which I would say is a mix of industry and consulting. So my last engagement was with IndusInd Bank. So I was looking at their model validations as a part of risk management for close to 3 years. Prior to that, it was consulting, which was with Nomura Research and with Deloitte. So close to 7 years in consulting, and a few selective projects where I had a chance to work on was model development, derivatives valuation, fixed income or structured product valuation, etc., and risk management in general. And I do have some bit of software experience as well, but that was long back. So this was after my engineering. So I got through to Wipro Technologies as a part of my campus placement. So I spent close to 2 years in Wipro before I went for my full-time MBA. And academically, I am a CFA, a CQF, an MBA in finance, and an engineering graduate. So this is briefly my professional and academic profile. Now, I've been a faculty for some time now. So I've been a visiting faculty at a few management and economic schools in India, and I've been doing that for close to 7 years now. So I used to do it in parallel while working full time in the industry as well. And I do have experience on curriculum designs or curriculum enhancements, etc. Because generally I try to keep the curriculums to be in sync with what the industry demands. Because many a times, if that is not there, then people lose connect as to what exactly we are learning in college and what exactly they'll be working on in the industry. So generally, I help in that as well. And I write a lot. So I publish articles around mainly using technologies for finance or quant finance in general or capital markets. So I publish it on my website as well as on a couple of other places on the internet. So a couple of online platforms as well. So this is in brief about me. So let's begin. So let's understand what is Python, because when we talk of open source, we hear of the words Python, R programming, etc. So yes, I mean, Python is more of general purpose. So that is something which industry has adopted, and not just financial services, but in general as well. And it has gained a lot of traction, and it will continue to increase in importance. So we'll talk about a few qualities or properties of Python and why it becomes so appealing to industry participants. So firstly, it's an open source tool or open source programming language, which is very, very versatile. So that way you can apply Python to any scenario. Now, once you know the logic, simply converting that into a line of code in Python is not very difficult. So something which we'll see in our simple demos as well. And it's very, very appealing for people across the spectrum, I would say. So right from academia up till researchers to industry participants, everyone find this to be a very handy tool. And Python is supported by a very active user community. So we'll spend some time understanding what is this user community and how exactly we support each other. So we'll talk about it when we talk of the features of Python. And Python is different than something which you might have learned earlier. So many of us, as a part of our high school training, or maybe as a part of our graduation, we might have studied difficult languages like Java or C++. Now, Python is not that difficult. So the learning curve for Python is not that steep. C++ is a different beast altogether. So that is something which you don't really have to worry about much. Python is very straightforward comparatively. Now, a few key features of this particular tool. So firstly, it's open source. So what I mean by open source is it's free. You can simply download Python and start using it right now. And there's no separate licensing agreement or nothing to be done. You can simply download the tool and use it as you like. Whatever libraries and functionalities come with Python, everything is free. So that's also a big advantage, because even on my client assignments and whenever clients require any kind of modeling, we generally stick to open source. That way they don't have to worry about licensing or other problems. They can simply use the model going ahead. So so as a part of our client deliverables also, I generally push for Python because it's a useful tool and it's open source. Then the set of libraries are extensive. So when I say libraries, you can imagine these are a set of ready functionalities. So take a very simple functionality. Now imagine that we are adding two numbers, and let's say addition is a very difficult task. Just imagine hypothetically. So if I had to write an addition there, then I have to actually go somewhere in the code and write something like a x plus y, whereby I'm adding two variables x and y. But when I say a library, I may have something like an add function, which has been defined in Python. So I have to simply call the add function. So whenever you have libraries which are defined, you call the library. You don't have to write everything from scratch. It saves a lot of development effort. So I simply call the add library and I pass two inputs, x and y. And as an output of this library, I simply get the sum of these variables. So there can be n number of variables as well. So very, very similar to what we see in an Excel function as well. So even in Excel, we have common functions which are defined, but Python goes a step ahead. So many things which Excel cannot accomplish, that is something which Python can readily do. So we'll talk about it as well along the way. There's a multi-purpose tool. So as I mentioned, you can apply it for various applications. It's that way it's very, very versatile and can be easily implemented to the project requirements. Then it's OS agnostic. So yes, most of the client systems or enterprise systems are based on Windows servers. But many a times, some of the clients might say that we want to go in for a Linux or we use a Mac OS. So again, that's not a problem, because whatever things we write on Python, they are OS agnostic. They can run seamlessly across any operating system platform. Code is very, very easy to read and understand. So you can literally convert a difficult looking equation into a line of code in Python. So since we are not talking much about quant finance here, I'll not get into the equations bit, but yeah, imagine a equation like something pertaining to option pricing, something which you might have seen as a part of your day-to-day activities as well. So that can be easily converted into a line in Python. So that's how easy it gets, how translating something in theory into something in the code which a computer can understand. So it has a very supportive user community. So something which I had briefly mentioned earlier. So why do we require a user community here is because this is open source. Now, whenever something is open source, we don't have a dedicated customer support. So unlike the paid softwares which we purchase, so in case we run into problems, we have a dedicated customer care number whom we can call and ask them that this XYZ is the problem for the software. So can you help us resolve that? But for open source, that facility unfortunately is not there, because there is no separate licensing and no one is going to separately give customer support. However, in order to work around that, there is a powerful user community which is available. And again, that's like an online platform which anyone can utilize. So whenever you run into any problems, let's say syntactical errors or need some help with understanding certain new functionalities or libraries which have been introduced, then you can definitely approach the user forum, and users are there to support each other, because that's how the overall community grows. And that way, and we are able to resolve whatever queries we are faced with. So a very, very active and a very supportive user community. So I also use the user community often. I try to contribute wherever I can. So again, that's like a very, very helpful platform. And new libraries. So when I say new libraries, you can imagine new functionalities. So new functionalities get added at regular intervals of time to the broader Python ecosystem. So now your question would be that, and let's say today there are 100 libraries. tomorrow, let's say 10 new libraries come in. So how do I keep a track of that? So we'll talk about that as well. So there is something called as a package manager. So that way you don't have to worry about keeping track of such and such a library. Do you really have access to that, etc. So we'll talk about that in a moment when I give you an idea of what is package management and why do you require package management. So any questions on this slide? Okay. Now, a few places where you'll see Python being adopted is firstly application development. Now, why I say rapid application development is because prototyping of models becomes very, very easy. Now, we'll look at Jupyter Notebook, something which I'll be using for demonstrating simple examples. So that supports rapid application development, which is very handy, especially from a project timeline side of things, because we know that every project which comes in has a tight deadline. So we would need some tool to quickly develop something which we can deliver. So again, rapid application development. Then it supports web development as well. So in case anyone wants to go in for APIs as well, which have to be developed separately, maybe for mobile or other apps, that can be done. It supports scaling of operations. So that way, if you develop a certain model or a certain set of code for maybe handling a certain portfolio, that can be easily scaled. So imagine that you have about 10,000 trades which are to be analyzed. Then if you write the code for 10,000 trades, even if that 10,000 goes to 50,000 in 6 months time, that's not a problem. The same code can work. Maybe we can optimize that a bit, but not any wholesale changes, maybe a few enhancements. But the same set of code is immensely scalable. So that way you don't have to do reworking of things. Something which is there, you can just readily use it, and that serves the purpose. Also, it supports hard analytics tasks. So something like machine learning, AI, we'll talk a bit about that as well. So again, those kind of things are supported by Python. And globally as well, you'll see organizations are investing heavily in technology. So many a times we know that, or we read the words which say that technology is seen as an enabler or a driver towards strategic goals. So that is right, because technology has various benefits which can be used or leveraged by organizations. So especially from operational risk management or from process optimization, these are a couple of key points which come to my mind when I think of technology for broader industry applications. So that way, you'll see an increasing push towards technology. So interestingly, a few years back, we had done one project whereby we analyzed what was the overall nature of investments which companies were doing in a few areas like compliance, technology, etc. And that was around 2012, 2013. So maybe we were just coming out of the financial crisis. So at that time, we saw that companies were investing significantly on technology, compliance, and human resources. So the technology started growing in importance, I would say, from around that period. So after that, there has been an increasing push, and you'll see that more and more technology tools are being adopted going ahead. Now, a few practical applications whereby Python can come handy. A few of them I have already worked on in the past, and few of them I have put here for discussions. So one is model development. So I can just erase the word quantitative here. You can apply it for other models as well. It need not be a difficult looking math model all the time, but it can be an equity research model as well, or maybe even a company valuation model which you want to build. Now, again, those are things which can be built via Python, because honestly, it's just the logic which we are trying to convert into a line of code which the machine understands, isn't it? So that way, any kind of modeling or model development. Likewise, it can also support model validations, because we know that validations is an important activity. Anything which has been developed has to be validated. So again, this is where internal audit can find value, because something which the business has developed might require reviews. So internal auditors might be asked to validate a certain logic or a certain model. Then automation or streamlining of reporting activities. Because as we know, after the financial crisis, the volume of reports which regulator expects is growing. And if you compare the number of reports around 2005 versus now, there has been a manifold increase. So that way, we need some kind of a system which can cater to these requirements. And these requirements can be dynamic, because tomorrow regulator can call up asking that we want such and such a report to be configured. So at that time, you require a certain flexible tool which will allow you to build such reports, and which will allow ready creation and dissemination of that report as well. So automation of that reports and preparing any kind of reports, that is possible. Python supports a lot of data visualization as well. So many times as a part of our internal MIS, something which you have to support to submit to our top management, be it compliance heads or head of risk, etc. So they may expect that along with the analysis tables, we also submit them some kind of a chart or some kind of a plot which they can quickly visualize. So again, Python has a couple of libraries which we'll talk about as well, at least briefly. Now those support any kind of visualization, take scatter plots, take regression lines, etc., and they can be easily done. Then forecasting or estimation of quantities. So again, something which is important both from a business perspective as well as from internal audit perspective. So I have prepared one example whereby we talk of forecasting for inventories. Now, that is one of the applications which you can do through modeling activity, because businesses frequently require these kind of estimations. So imagine a manufacturing company and they want to manage their inventory. So they may have a certain model which they have developed, and they may request internal audit to review that model independently to see if they have got the model right. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. I've prepared a simple hands-on using a time series model for that. Then classification of quantities. So classifying so maybe one of the examples where it comes to classification is think of a borrower. Now, if a borrower comes to a bank and if the bank has to make a certain decision whether a loan has to be disbursed to that particular borrower or not. So again, that is where classification can come handy. So you can have something like a machine learning algorithm, which will read the borrower's data, and based on historical information, which is already available in our system, we may come up with, or the machine may come up with a certain decision as, let's say, a yes or a no. That is whether a loan should be advanced to a certain borrower or it's credit risky to advance it to them. So that can be classification. Then big data analytics. So this is what we call as machine learning and artificial intelligence type of techniques. So we'll at least touch upon the basics of these things along the way. Then definitely for trading. So trading happens to be one of the avenues whereby Python gets used. So many banks and fund houses have already started adopting Python for trading. Not high frequency trading exactly, but at least for general trading, because high frequency requires some other infrastructure which is based on C++, but otherwise Python can support trading, anything which is non-HFT in nature. Risk management, definitely any kind of models around value at risk or Greeks calculations, duration management, etc. All of these can be done for risk management purposes. Then parallel processing or parallel computing, as we call it. So most of the activities which we do in our day-to-day activity or day-to-day lives are serial in nature. So when I say serial in nature, let's say there is a certain activity which has 3 parts, 1, 2, and 3. So when I'm doing things serially, I'm doing it one after the other. So imagine that this is a task X which I have to accomplish, and it is subdivided into 3 subtasks. So I start with task 1, I complete that, then I go to task 2. I start task 2, I complete it, then I go to task 3. So this is what I call as operations in serial. So most of our normal applications are supported by serial processing. So this is good enough for us. However, there are certain peculiar applications whereby parallel computing comes very handy. One of the examples is simulations or maybe even scenario analysis. So imagine that there are 3 scenarios which I need to run, because again, as a part of regulatory requirements, banks are required to run stress scenarios. So imagine there are 3 large scenarios, 1, 2, and 3, which are to be run. So imagine the regulator has specified these scenarios. And again, if I start running things in parallel, it will take a long time. So as a part of parallel computing, what we do is we try to leverage our processor's computing power. Now whatever server we are working on, it has immense amount of computing power. We only have to leverage that. So through parallel computing, we try to divide the processor power such that we start with 1, 2, and 3 simultaneously. And that way, we don't have to wait for another sub-process to complete before the next begins. So that way, it speeds up the overall activity. So a couple of applications, as I mentioned, is stress scenarios and Monte Carlo simulations. And also, statistical testing is something which we frequently use. So this is the hypothesis testing bit. So many a times this can come handy for our audit functions as well. So let's say I'm working on a certain set of numbers and or maybe a couple of data sets, and I want to decide whether there's a significant relationship between the 2 variables. So when that is the case, hypothesis testing comes to a rescue. So again, Python supports both parametric as well as non-parametric hypothesis tests. It's very, very easy through Python. Once you know which test is to be applied, it just takes a few lines of code and your output is ready. So these are just a few applications. I'm sure there'll be more as well. So any questions on this slide for anyone? Okay. Now, giving a few things which you require in your Python infrastructure. So in case you decide to adopt Python on your respective systems, and these are 2 or 3 things which will be required. So one is the Python interpreter. So a brief history was Python was introduced in 1991, and subsequently there have been multiple releases for Python. Again, everything is open source. You don't have to pay for anything. You simply have to use the version which you want to. Now, most of the legacy systems are available on what we call as Python 2.x. So our older systems are on 2.x, so maybe 2.4, 2.7, etc. But all the new development is happening on 3.x. So in case any of you decide to use Python for your applications, ensure that you use a 3.x version, because now the user support, etc., will be available only for 3.x. We are not supporting 2.x anymore. So many a times we want to transition the 2.x code on to 3.x. So take any version from 3.x, that's absolutely fine. I think the latest version out currently is 3.9. Now you can check it from this link. So this is the place where you can download the interpreter. So when I say I download the Python, I imply download the Python interpreter. So interpreter is the software which is going to run the actual code. So this is your Python engine. Now, a few things pertaining to compatibility. So, I mean, this is just a simple example. So, simple syntactical changes have happened over these versions, so 2.x to 3.x. So, maybe printing a simple hello world in 2.x was in this way, having double quotes and then printing it, whereas 3.x has just brackets around it. But these are syntactical things. So, something which you don't have to remember. That is something which you will learn along the way. But subtle changes have happened over 2.x and 3.x. So this is the main workhorse. So this is the place which this is the software or tool which will do the actual execution for your applications. Next comes Anaconda. So Anaconda is a package manager which we require along with Python. So earlier, if you recollect, I had mentioned that there is a wide variety of libraries which is available within the Python's ecosystem. So we have to use those libraries for various applications. So I took a very simple example of a library of addition of 2 numbers. So that way, imagine there are hundreds of libraries which are available. Now, for us, we don't have to worry about what library is available. Now, if we have to use a library, then that is something which will be housed inside Anaconda. So Anaconda, as I say, it's a package manager. So all of your library setups will be sitting inside Anaconda. So all you have to do is you have to simply install that particular library, which is already available inside your Anaconda installation, and you start consuming it. So that's how easy it is. Now, Anaconda is free for use. Again, this is open source, so you don't have to pay for Anaconda as well. You have to simply download and start using it. And it's useful for both Python as well as R, because as I mentioned, these are 2 popular tools when it comes to the open source side of things. Then it contains libraries and packages which you can use for your core application development. Also, Anaconda, so this is like a commercial name. So within Anaconda, we have something called as a Conda. So Conda is the actual package manager which sits inside Anaconda. So slightly technical side, but you don't have to worry about these nitty-gritties. Once you have Anaconda installed, everything gets taken care of. So that way, whatever packages are to be consumed, etc., will be housed inside Anaconda. So the way it happens is, imagine that there are 10,000 packages which are available in the Python ecosystem. Naturally, we are not going to require 10,000 packages. And it will be very inefficient to install them on our respective machines, because the machine will get that heavy because if you install these many libraries. So what we do is we install only the required number of libraries. So imagine out of the entire ecosystem of 10,000 libraries, I just require about 50 libraries. So 10,000 libraries are available inside Anaconda. However, in my actual application where I build Python, I will be importing just 50. So that way I keep the overall application very light. At the same time, tomorrow if I require the 51st library, I can simply go to Anaconda, install it, and I start using it directly. So that's how convenient it is. then it's an environment which supports scientific computing, data sciences, statistical testing, machine learning, or advanced analytics as well. This will easily integrate with any of the IDEs. So IDEs is the third component which you will require as a part of your systems in case you decide to consume Python for your project applications. So we'll talk a bit about IDEs as well, and most of the IDEs. So IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. So you can imagine this is like a platform on which you can develop your models or develop your functionalities which you want to use on your projects. So pick up any IDE, it integrates really well with Anaconda. So again, it's very, very user friendly, and it's so user friendly that you simply install that. There's a .exe file available. You simply install it, and all of the required links are done by our machine. So we don't have to worry about that. We simply start using them. Now, at times it can happen that we are working on certain laptops or certain machines whereby memory is a problem, because not every machine might be maybe 8 or 16 GB. So let's say you're working on a 2 GB RAM machine. So there is a via media for that as well. So in case your client says that we want Python on our systems, but we are slightly conservative on the memory side, we don't have a very advanced machine. So at that time, rather than Anaconda, one could go in for a Miniconda as well. So Miniconda does similar things like Anaconda. Only thing is it is comparatively lighter. So a few functionalities which come along with Anaconda are not there in Miniconda. But that is in no way going to hamper things. So if memory is a constraint, then Miniconda is the way to go. But if not, then I would say go in for a full-fledged thing, go in for Anaconda. You can simply download it from Continuum Analytics website and you start using it. So this is the second component. So the first component was the interpreter. Second component was Anaconda or the package manager. And this is the third component. So an IDE. So this is something which you'll require to actually write your code, because finally you want to have something which the machine will understand. So your logic, which gets converted into a line which the machine understands, will sit inside the IDE, which is an integrated development environment. So there are multiple types of IDEs which are available in the broader market. So again, everything is open source, so you don't have to pay for anything. Maybe there are a few additional add-ons which are available, which you have to pay for, but honestly, you don't really require them. You can simply use the free versions, which is more than enough, because for the last 7 years whereby I am using Python, I have not paid anything for usage of anything. I have simply used all the open source tools, and which have sufficed across a range of projects for me. So these are a few popular IDEs which are available. So you'll be required to install one of them on your respective machines if you have to use Python. And this is where you can actually start coding Python. So again, as I mentioned, coding Python is not very difficult. Once you know what exactly is to be accomplished, converting that into a code of Python is comparatively straightforward. Again, selecting a suitable IDE. So this I would say is a very subjective or an individual specific question. So that way, maybe if you plan to use Python going ahead, try out a few IDEs and pick one which you find the most easiest to use. So these are a few of them which are very, very popular. So pick up any one which you like. So I would say give it a try for each of these things. You'll get comfortable with one of them. So start using them. So if personally, I use PyCharm for all of my client assignments because it makes my project management really easy. And any kind of demonstrations which I have to do as a part of my certificate courses, or even if my client requires some simple demos, we do it through a Jupyter notebook. So for our discussion as well, I have prepared a few examples which are based on Jupyter notebook. So we'll talk a bit about Jupyter platform at that time. So this is component number 3. So just to recap, 3 things which you require ready for your open source development. One is your Python interpreter. Second is your package manager, which is Anaconda or Miniconda. And third is a IDE. So pick any IDE which you like, and you can start developing code there. So any questions on the last 3 slides? Okay. Now, giving a few ideas of key libraries. So something which you will also have to frequently use on projects. So we'll not get into how exactly we'll be using them, because that will get into the implementation part, which can take longer. But at least knowing these names will be handy, because the moment you start reading about Python, these are a few things which will quickly show up. So just to give a quick understanding of these things. So I would say the top 4 or 5 libraries are something which you will end up frequently using. So unless you want to build something which is specific to machine learning, which you want to use it from your maybe audit or reporting purposes, at that time, unless it's machine learning, if it's a common application, you can build it through the top 4 libraries, I would say. So these are the workhorses which are good enough for almost anything on non-machine learning side. Something on the machine learning side requires these things, scikit-learn or tensors or keras, whichever. But I would say but initially when you start off, you may not want to immediately venture to the machine learning side of things, but at least the pure Python side, these are a few ones which are to be used. And again, all of these work seamlessly with each other as well. So just to give a quick understanding of these libraries. So numerical Python or NumPy as we call it. So this is something which supports arrays of data. So most of us will be familiar with what is an array. So an array is nothing but a collection of data. So imagine that you have, let's say, certain sales data which you're reviewing. So that can be an array. So you're simply collecting the sales data from a system and you're using it for analysis. So once you have it inside the array, you can do various things on top of that data. So maybe working on individual sales entries, etc. Next is SciPy or scientific Python. So this supports various functions which we frequently require on modeling side of things. So things like interpolation, something which we frequently require as well, isn't it? So imagine that you are working on a certain yield curve, and we know that for a yield curve, something like a GSEC curve, which is published by FIMDA on a daily basis. So even that GSEC curve is something for which, so it's not published for every single time point which you require, isn't it? It will be published only for specific time points. So whenever we have to interpolate somewhere in between, we require some kind of algorithm. And in some applications, simple linear interpolation may not be handy. Now, through Excel, yes, you can use simple linear interpolation. So there is a forecast function which we use in Excel frequently. But imagine that you want to do something better, something on top of linear interpolation. Imagine that you want to go in for splines. So let's say a quadratic or a cubic spline interpolation, which is a sophisticated version of linear. Then naturally doing it in Excel is immensely painful because it's an equation which has to be solved and Excel can make things messy. But with Python, it's very, very easy. You simply call the SciPy library and you do a simple interpolation. It's just a 2-step activity and your interpolated numbers are ready. Then pandas. So pandas, you can imagine, is very, very similar to an Excel sheet. So we know that Excel has a certain restriction on the number of rows. So we have been using Excel all these years. So if I recollect, I think 10 lakh rows is the maximum limit for Excel. Naturally, we can never have that much amount of data because the moment the number of rows in Excel cross about 1 lakh, that Excel gets immensely slow. At times it may crash as well. Now, in order to counter that problem, we have pandas. So you can imagine pandas is a very large spreadsheet which is sitting inside Python. You can visualize it just like an Excel. So you can imagine it in terms of rows and individual columns. But it's very, very fast and it can handle any kind of data. So that way, volume of data is not a problem. So in case you decide to use any kind of big data analytics, or maybe if you're reviewing certain big data analytics techniques which have been applied by business, pandas is something which can come to the rescue. Then matplotlib. So matplotlib is a plotting library. So as I mentioned many a times, we want a visual representation of things. A simple table may not be good enough. So at that time, matplotlib offers a plethora of plots and charts which can be used. So I've done a simple demo on time series analysis in the latter part. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. So I've fit a ARIMA model for that. So what is ARIMA, etc. We'll come to it at least briefly. And I've used plotting from matplotlib. We'll talk about it. So along with matplotlib, another library is Seaborn. So you can imagine Seaborn is an enhancement on top of matplotlib, again, supporting visualization. Because many a times as a part of our audit reports, we require data visualization. So that way, these kind of things can be used. And the advantage is whatever plot you get, you can simply copy and paste it in your audit reports or any other project report which you're working on. It's a simple copy and paste, which makes it very, very convenient. It's just a picture which you're picking and pasting it as a part of your reports. And then come the machine learning bit. So these are a couple of libraries which support things like regression, classification from a machine learning side of things. So in case you decide to venture on that side, then you'd require Scikit or Keras. So, but for most common applications, you don't really require these libraries. The top 4, as I mentioned, will be your workhorse, which will help you accomplish most of the activities. So any questions on this slide? Okay. All right, so just a quick recap on the things which you have discussed. So yes, we know that Python caters to a wide spectrum of users, right from students, researchers, up till working professionals. It's immensely easy to use. So if you pick up anything on Python, you can easily understand what that is, and it's not difficult. So even difficult looking equations can be easily translated into a line of code in Python. So that way learning curve is not very difficult. So especially if you have to adopt it for your projects, I think that is something which helps, because we don't want to spend too much of time into learning something and then applying it on projects. So Python comes to the rescue there. Then globally as well, you see an increasing push towards Python. So firstly, it's open source, and secondly, the kind of libraries which supports is excellent. So even when you can think of IBOR transitions, which are currently happening. So many companies who are building open source calculators for handling IBOR transitions, because we know that LIBOR has been phased out. So yes, USD LIBOR is still available for most of the tenors, but gradually it will get phased out. But even those models, so if you want to build a transition model, maybe from IBOR onto something on SOFR, so maybe you're trying to move from USD LIBOR to a SOFR. So again, that kind of curve construction, bootstrapping, etc., can be handled through Python, through common Python libraries. So that can be one of the current applications which is being used. Then with certain functionalities or a good set of libraries available, we don't have to do things from scratch. That is, we already have something which is ready, and then we have to customize on top of it. So that's a big advantage, isn't it? Because starting things from scratch takes a lot of time. Something which is already there, we know that these things are available, so we can start building on top of them, which saves a lot of development time and effort, something which we require on our respective projects. Also, for big data, Python happens to be a language of choice with its supportive user community and an ever-increasing set of libraries. Also, it supports data aggregation, visualization extensively, because many times as a part of our audit applications, we may require data aggregation. So especially, let's say we want to review position reconciliation, or maybe I want to reconcile exposure numbers for a certain counterparty. So that can be a data aggregation. So yes, you can do it through pivots in Excel, but again, pivots can be painful at times, because then there are certain operational things which one has to be careful with, like updation of pivots, etc. And in a hurry, it may happen that we may just miss out on updating a pivot, which would give a wrong result. But with Python, again, that gets taken care of. So I've done a simple example on aggregation as well, something which we'll be covering in our subsequent part. And one more thing is to do with databases. So we know that, for smaller organizations, most of their data would be available on Excel. So MS Excel still happens to be like the main place whereby they'll save their data. But going ahead, and databases could be a way to go, because the thing is, something which is sitting on a database becomes very easy for referencing. Also, at the same time, if you have to apply any advanced analytics, you require data on a database. Every time applying advanced things on Excel-based data may not be possible, especially big data side of things. So that way, Python integrates really well with almost every database. Take Oracle, take SQL, take SQLite, whichever. Python has plugins for that. So if that is your backend, or if you want to transition to that backend and then use it with Python, that is also something which is seamlessly possible. Now, a quick slide on big data. So we have been hearing the word big data a lot. So if you open up any journal or any newspaper which you frequently refer to, you'll hear of big data techniques. And these days, if you see that, and every candidate which you will see in the market, if they're looking for a job, they will be talking of big data. So they want to become data scientists. So that's like a transition which has happened. So about 10 to 12 years back, everyone wanted to get into investment banking. Now that trend has changed. Now people say that we want to become data scientists. So, so that has to do from the role on the big data side, and which has gained a lot of traction recently. And I would say that big data has picked up around 2012, 2013. So if you had asked someone around 2001, 2002 that if you want to become a data scientist, I mean, they would have looked at you asking that, I mean, what is data sciences? But come 2012, 2013, and people knew what is the importance of data and how exactly data can be monetized. Because the idea is businesses are trying to use the available data into actionable plans. That is, they want to convert that data into a useful set of information which they can use to make a certain business decision. So that's where big data comes in, and that's why data scientists are something which are in demand in the market at present. So just understanding a few things for big data. So you can imagine big data is potentially useful information which is generated from various sources. So it can be from economic sources or from markets as well. So we'll talk a bit about that. So just a quick slide on this. So from a data perspective, there are two types of sources which we commonly come across. One is the traditional sources, something which we have been using all these years. One is financial markets. So most of us actively trade or at least invest in equity markets, for example. Then we have Nifty 50 data. So let's say I'm tracking the Nifty data. Then that is like a time series of information which I can consume from NSE's website and use it for my analysis. So that can be the financial markets information. Then we have financial reports from companies. So as a part of audit, we frequent or either audit or business valuation, we frequently refer to financial reports. So annual reports of companies can be an example. So that is another source of information. Next can be economic statistics, which are published by authorities. So things like CPI information. So CPI, WPI numbers, that is something which we require for our analysis as well. So that is also one of the sources or traditional sources of data. And then we have the non-traditional ones, or the ones which are new. So something which I've picked up over the recent years. So individual actions. So we know that everyone uses a smartphone these days. So that will help us relate with the IoT of things point as well. IoT stands for Internet of Things. So yes, I mean, almost everyone uses a smartphone these days, and data has become immensely cheap. So that way we have high-speed data which is available, which can be consumed for various purposes. So things like actions on social media, online reviews, emails, etc. All of these things get analyzed in some way or the other. So one of the examples which you might have noticed in the past as well. So imagine that you're shopping on one of these commercial websites, let's say Amazon, and if you purchase a certain brand of T-shirt, and if you make the purchase that you deliver and that T-shirt gets delivered, you start using it. So that way, I mean, the machine is intelligent. So the next time you open Amazon, if you search for something, on one side or one corner of the screen, you'll see that these are the new designs of that particular T-shirt brand which you had purchased earlier. So that's an example of marketing analytics. So that's how, I mean, your media activity is getting tracked as well. So that is also an important source of information. So whenever we say that cookies are tracking our activities on the internet, that is an example of that. So our actions get tracked, so that the next time, from a marketing perspective, for example, that becomes useful. Even our online reviews. So tomorrow, if you post a review for a certain restaurant, so let's say you go out with your family tonight for dinner, and after coming back, you really like the food and you post a favorable review online. Then the next time you start searching for certain restaurants online, then that is a restaurant which will come up with saying that this is a new offer which this particular XYZ restaurant is offering. So that's again sales or marketing analytics, I would say. So these are just a few examples. So that's how our individual actions get recorded as well. Next is corporate exhaust data. So things like bank records, retail tax scanners also, they carry a lot of information, something which we consume as a part of big data. Then we have IoT of things or Internet of Things type of data. So specifically things like RFID chips, which are sitting inside smartphones, etc. So one example or one interesting example which I had come across a few months back. So that was pertaining to an insurance company based in the United States. I don't recollect the name exactly, but what that insurance company had done was they had given smartwatches to each of the people who were, or each of the persons who had purchased their policy or their policy holders. And the policy holders were happy because they're getting a smartwatch / an activity tracker. Now everyone will be happy, isn't it? Now, the idea behind why that company had done that was they used to track the activity of their policyholders. So let's say a certain policyholder has gone in for a health insurance there. Then the company would have access to the activity which that particular borrower or that particular policyholder does. So that way, if that particular policyholder is following a very active lifestyle, then yes, that gets recorded. Whereas compare that to an extreme opposite scenario, that is the policyholder is a couch potato; it doesn't move at all. So that way, someone who is leading an active lifestyle, naturally there is a chance that they may not have to come in for reclaiming their health insurance, because they are following a healthy lifestyle, and that way chances of them falling sick is slightly remote. But comparing that with someone who is a couch potato, naturally that probability increases. So maybe the premiums which have to be adjusted for the insurance side of things, that is something which the company can do. So this is real data analytics which gets used as well. So that way they have actionable data based on which they can regulate the kind of premiums which they will be charging to their customers. So this is how IoT of data can get used as well. So just one of the applications. Now, a few characteristics of big data. First is velocity. So when we talk of velocity of data, we talk from something called as data latency. So when we say a low latency data, so that implies this is a kind of data which updates very fast, or it's a very frequent updation of data. So thing is stock price feeds. So imagine that you have a Bloomberg terminal, or maybe a Reuters terminal, or any other data provider. So that way you'll get real-time prices which are getting updated maybe every few seconds, and that is something which may be consumed by a front office or anyone who is consuming that data. So that is a low latency data, something which gets updated at a very fast interval. Second is a high latency data. So high latency data is something which updates only at infrequent intervals. That is, let's say, a CPI information. That is, inflation data is a lagged kind of data. So we receive it on a 1 month lagged basis. So that can be an example of a high latency data. But again, both important for overall analysis purposes. Now, talking from a variety of data sets. So that way, data is available in a variety of forms. So we could have structured data. So something like spreadsheets or databases. So this is by far the most common way of using data, because most of our financial data comes in a structured format. So all that we have been using all these years is a structured form. So we have everything in the form of Excel spreadsheets, or maybe we may have a certain backend database. So let's say we have a Calypso or Murex system in the backend. So that becomes like a major source from where the data will be sourced, and we simply consume that data and start using it for our analysis. So this is the structured data which you will commonly observe in most industries. Next is a semi-structured data as well. Now, a semi-structured data can be data from photos or web page code. Now, something which we don't really require from a finance perspective. But again, depending on the kind of domain whereby we want to apply this technology, that will change. So one of the examples whereby semi-structured data can get used is, let's say, in medical sciences. So let's say we are talking of a radiologist, or maybe someone who reads X-rays or reads through photographic reports of patients. So that way, analysis of that becomes important, because imagine that there are about 1,000 patient reports which a doctor has to analyze. Now, if there is some way of crunching those reports and giving some kind of actionable data to the doctor, that is valuable, isn't it? Now, of course, we are in no way trying to replace the medical practitioner, because a certified medical practitioner has built an expertise over a period of time, which we simply cannot ignore. So that is the core expertise. However, in order to support the activities which a doctor does, we can use such kind of analysis. That is, we can have big data analysis like machine learning or AI type of things, which can come to our rescue. And that is something which we can start consuming. So maybe we can have a machine which will analyze an incoming X-ray. It will. So I mean, there are certain nitty-gritties to it. So that way, we basically divide that X-ray into multiple parts, and based on every part, we try to drag information. And that information gets consumed by the doctor when he or she has to come up with a certain diagnosis for that. So that is another place where semi-structured data gets used. Unstructured data used very rarely. So maybe for media analytics, or maybe companies like YouTube, etc., might find unstructured data useful. But otherwise, for common project applications, I do not expect too much of unstructured data coming in. So to be honest, up till now, for most of the activities which I have worked on my earlier projects, it has been a structured information. So most of the times, a proper set of data is available. If not proper, at least it's in a standard format. So if there are certain gaps in data, etc., that can be easily managed. So any questions on the last 2-3 slides? Or maybe has anyone used any open source tools in the past, either Python or anything else, or maybe any paid software like MATLAB or something? Okay, okay. But still, I mean, if not, then I think this is one of the useful tools which can be subsequently, I mean, you can definitely check it out. And if you find it useful, then yes, I think that will be good, especially from a project perspective. Now, talking of a few use cases from an internal audit standpoint. So I would say that the very first advantage of using such kind of tools for internal audit is the ability to consume entire population of data. Because as a part of the audit process, we generally have been using sampling of data. So imagine that there are about 10,000 trades which are there on a book and which we are trying to analyze. Then at that time, from those 10,000 trades, naturally we pick up a smaller sample and we try to verify those samples and give a sign off. So something which we commonly observe in stat audit as well. So in statutory audit, so let's say a certain auditor is auditing a company's finances. Then at that time they will pick up a certain samples of trades and they will use that for end-to-end analysis. So things like maybe capital charge calculations or maybe the kind of collateral adjustments which are required, any kind of illiquidity adjustments, etc. All of these things happen on a very sample-wide basis. Now that can be replaced by a population because we have a tool like Python that supports handling of entire population-wide data. So that's a huge advantage for us because that way we don't have to worry about the way in which we have sampled something. So that is not our headache anymore. So since we are picking up the entire population set, that's a big advantage because that way we are ensuring that every single element which is sitting as a part of the portfolio is getting checked. So it can be checking for various applications, but we don't have to pick and choose any samples. We are using the entire thing. So I think that is by far the main point. Subsequently, of course, we'll go through the nitty-gritties of examples as well. But I feel this is something which will add a significant amount of value, something which I think the audit practice will find immensely useful. Of course, now there are various ways in which people do scientific picking of samples. So maybe stratified sampling, stratified random sampling, etc. But that's no match to the entire population, isn't it? So again, that's why entire population is something which can be consumed. Now a few examples which I have put together. So I have used the Jupyter notebook here. So we'll keep switching between the slides and Jupyter. So I prepared about 5 or 6 examples and simple examples which will help us relate to how exactly Python can be used easily. So one of the examples which came to our mind was the fixed fees which are charged to banking clients. So especially important from a private banking perspective. So let's say there is a certain bank and they have a certain set of customers coming in. So naturally for servicing the customer, they are going to charge a certain fee. Now, it may so happen that depending on the size of the customer, the bank decides that they want to charge a certain X fee to the customer. So that can be something which has been defined as a part of the bank's business policy, and they'll say that so every new customer coming in, once we bring them on board, we look at the size of the customer's book, and accordingly, we are going to charge a certain fixed fee to them. So, so this is something which business does very frequently, and we may require, as a part of internal audit function, we may have to review the kind of fees which have been charged to the customer, because this is an important check, isn't it? Now, it can be some arbitrary fee which has been charged to the customer, be it higher or a lower fee. It has to be the exact fee which has been specified in the policy document, because we may have a board-approved policy which says that these are the ranges, and this is the policy, or this is the fee which has to be applied based for this particular range of the customer. So that is something which might have to be checked as a part of internal audit. So this can be one of the examples. So let me just open up the inputs which I have prepared for this. Yeah, I'll just open up the Excel. So is my Excel visible to everyone?
Yes, Ameya, it is visible.
Okay, okay, all right. So imagine that this is like information which I have taken from my business policy. So my business policy says that for so these are the limits. So any customers whose maybe portfolio size is less than some value. I've just given some hypothetical values here: 500, 300, 7, etc. And we have charged a fees here. So depending on the size, so maybe I can just change this to 100 or something to make it slightly in sync. So these are the ranges. So any customer who has a portfolio which is higher than, let's say, 100 crores will be, or maybe less than 100 crores will be charged a fee of 10 crores. So imagine all of these numbers are in crores. Let's say a certain customer who has a portfolio size greater than 100 crores, but up to 300 will be charged, let's say, a value of 33. And anyone who is having a portfolio which is higher than 500, apply 55. So I mean, I've just taken hypothetical numbers. These can be taken from the actual business policy or the organization-wide policy. So this can be one set of information. And let's say this is the fee dump which we receive. So this is something which we can readily receive from our enterprise risk system. So most of these firms have some way of storing the data. So let's say this can either be a simple Excel generated data, or it can be drawn from a database. And for let's say ID defines our client name. So imagine these are individual identifiers for the client, and we have the portfolio sizes. So again, I've taken some sample or hypothetical values, and these, let's say, are the fees which have been charged. So these three are the columns which may come as a part of the internal audit exercise. So let's say there are 10 clients, and for them we have this information which we have to review. So we have to decide whether there has been a breach or no breach. So when I say a breach, that implies if it's the answer for breach is yes, that implies an incorrect fee has been charged, or a fee which is not in sync with the business policy. So that will qualify as a breach. Whereas if the fee applied is correct, then it will show as a no breach. So let's say these three are my inputs, and this is the column which I want to populate. So I need a quick yes or no answer. So again, you can do this in Excel, but through Python, it becomes very, very easy. So let me switch to what I call as a Jupyter notebook. So that way you'll get an idea of one of the IDEs. So this is what you call as IPython. So IPython or Jupyter notebook. So earlier it used to be called as IPython. Subsequently, it was renamed as Jupyter a few years back. But this is one of the places, or if you recollect the IDE's point, which I mentioned, which I call as integrated development environment. So this is one of those environments which is available. So, so just to give you an idea of what I have written here. So these are the libraries. So if you see, if you see the names of the libraries, these are some things which we had discussed on one of our earlier slides. That is, when I say import, let's say import pandas PD, this implies that I'm importing the library into my system. That is, this library is already installed on my machine. That is, it's housed inside Anaconda. I have installed it for my project purposes, and now I'm simply importing it because it's already existing. I have to simply call it and use it in my analysis. So I import various libraries. So import pandas, NumPy, Matplot, we have already seen. There are a couple of interesting libraries which we'll talk about as well. So another application which I find is immensely useful. So something we'll talk about. So Py, PDF, etc. So that way there are various libraries which you'll see in the Python ecosystem. You don't have to remember the names of them. It's not required. If you simply go to your Anaconda, or if you go to your repository, you'll get a list of all the libraries which are available. And then maybe depending on your applications, you can use the online documentation or user support forums to decide how exactly you want to, or which library you want to use. So that way, no need to remember library names. And anyways, the important ones we always know, but there are always new things which come in. So for example, PyPDF2, this was something which was new. I did not know it earlier. But through documentation, I got to know that this is a handy library, something which I started using recently. We'll talk about that. So, so as a very first step in any Python code which you write, you have to import libraries. This is how you tell Python that I have a certain project activity to be done, and I am telling you to use these set of libraries. So I say a run, so I can run things block by block. So again, one more advantage, especially from testing perspective. So imagine that you want to build smaller functionalities. So let's say there are about 10 functionalities which are to be developed. So what you could do is, so allow me to just switch to paintbrush for a moment. So imagine that as a part of the audit application, there are 10 activities which are to be accomplished. And imagine all the 10 activities are independent of each other, or maybe they are related, but they are not really dependent on each other. So I have 1 through to 10. Now, of course, you may not want to address all the 10 activities in one go, because you may decide on a priority, and let's imagine that this is the priority list. So 1, 2, 3, this is the same sequence which you want to follow. So let's say I start with activity 1. Now I may want to just test this much functionality. I don't have to worry about the remaining 9. Imagine that's the case. Then in this case, you can use something like a Jupyter notebook. Now, why Jupyter notebook? Because if you see, for Jupyter, we have these individual blocks. So if you see on the left-hand side, it talks like LN2. So this is like an individual bit of code which I can execute. So if I run this much portion, if the first portion, that implies I'm simply running the first block only. I'm not touching anything else. So that's an advantage, because if I have to focus only on activity 1 at the moment, I can just write the activity 1 inside my first block. I can execute that and I have my output for consumption. I don't have to worry about the other 9 activities. Now, let's say the first activity is done. I have verified it as a part of my audit activity. Now I want to start focusing on activity 2. Again, advantage is you don't have to worry about activity 1 sitting here, because it's a separate block. All you do is you introduce a new block. So if you see LN2 here, so imagine this is the new block which I have introduced. So my activity 2 will come in the second block. So that way it is independent of the first block, and I can individually test the second activity as well. So that's an advantage of Jupyter. So something which you may find useful on your projects as well. Accordingly, you can apply it for other activities along the way as well. Now, if you want all the 10 activities together, that is also possible. So maybe imagine that there are 10 blocks here. So this is block 1. Imagine there are 9 such blocks, and you may want to run all the blocks together. So that is also possible. So there are a couple of ways to do that. Either have all the 10 activities inside one single block, or create 10 individual blocks and then run it. So if you see, there is a way to run everything as well. So I think there is run all. Yeah. So if you see, there is a run all option available. So that way, if I have those 10 independent activities written, I can run them all as well. So that way, although they are separate, Python is going to allow me to exercise all of them together, or I can selectively pick and choose and run only those activities. So that way I can use it for my analysis, and that's how I can consume it. Now, this is a code in Python, so don't worry about the syntax. Now, syntax is something which you don't have to remember anyway. That is something which comes with practice. Syntax is not difficult. Now, main thing is the logic. Now, converting that logic into a line of code is something which should always be the focus. So even as a part of my training programs, whenever I take things on Python and we apply it for various quantitative models, so let's say we are building a Black-Scholes model or maybe a value at risk model, I also always tell candidates that don't get bogged down by the syntax. Syntax is something which you will develop as you practice more. So actually, I always tell people that programming is just like mathematics. So the more you practice, the more confident you get. You cannot read and master math, isn't it? So that's the fun with mathematics. Now in school, if we read a math problem, we feel that we understand everything. But the moment someone gives us a blank paper and tells us to solve it, we may go blank. So that's the same thing which can happen with programming as well. So by reading reading a ready code, you'll see, yeah, I mean, this looks easy and manageable. But practicing that gives you confidence. So tomorrow, if there is a blank template available, you can write the code yourself. So that's a matter of practice. So the main point to tell here is don't get bogged down by the syntax. Now, what I've written is just one way of doing things. There can be other ways as well. So that approach can keep on changing. So that's the logic which has to be included. But having clarity on what is the end objective is important. Like in our case, we know that my end objective in this example is to understand whether a certain private banking client has been applied a correct fee. If not, I have to give a flag as a yes and no. So that's what my code does here. So the code may look complex, but it's not very difficult. So maybe just a couple of lines which I would like to go through is how easy it is to read a CSV file. So if you see the first line here, pandas.read CSV. So this is how easily I can read Excel files. because most of the times your data may come in flat files, which we call as a CSV file, because CSV is like an industry standard whenever it comes to data transmission. So even if you have a certain enterprise risk system which you're using, it will always be a CSV file. Generally, we don't use a Excel there. Even if it's Excel, it's not a problem. You can do a read underscore Excel as well. Python can read Excel also. So in place of .csv, if you have a .xlsx, that will work fine as well, not a problem. But I have taken the one which is more common, the CSV bit. So this is how I simply read the files. So this is how easy it is. I simply write this line, and in this variable data underscore limit, I have the entire file with me. So the limits file has come in, the dump file has come in as well. So dump is nothing but something which I have procured from my back office, which I want to review. Now then I've just done some adjustments on the data, that is arranging the data in a certain order, etc. Because many a times it can have. Now I'll tell you the reason why I've done this kind of things, because again, this is something which will be project specific. So it may so happen that the limits which have been entered are not entered in the correct order. So let's say this order is incorrect. So let's say 500 is at the bottom and 7 is at the top. So even if that happens, now what my code is doing here is it is going to go sequentially. So for that reason, I have to sort my values in some way. So sorting is basically arranging it in a certain order. So I have decided to put it in an ascending order. And only then I start analyzing, because my code is written accordingly. So what I do is I pick up those files first. So these are the first two lines. And then I start going it line by line. That is, I simply load this as my table and I start doing a review row by row. So here it is just 10 clients. So imagine there are 1,000 clients. I can again use the same piece of code. I don't have to rewrite anything else. I just change the for condition. That is, here I have for running from 1 to 10. Now in place of this, again, I've kept it dynamic. So if you see the for loop, so again, this is a way in which you write a for. So a for is what we call as looping. So is everyone familiar with the concept of looping? So we colloquially say that we are listening to a certain song in a loop. So when I say a loop, we are repeating a certain activity over and over again. So that's what we do through a for as well. Whenever we have to repeat a certain set of activity n number of times, a for loop or a for condition is defined. So what I do is I go row by row and I check the portfolio size and a fee applied. And this will be benchmarked against the limits file which is given, because we have read the limits file as well. So that way I can check it, and as per single entry, whether that fee has been applied, whether it's right or wrong. And accordingly, I decide on a flag which says yes or no. So here, depending on the condition, I set a yes or no, which is going to appear in the breach column. So if you see, there is a breach column here, which is empty, which needs to be filled. So this is something which we can populate. So again, the code may look slightly complex, but if you have to break it down, it's very easy. Read the files, loop through the entire data, that is, loop through the entire client dump which is available, and based on your analysis, simply write a yes or a no. So depending on whether the correct fee has been applied, if yes, then it's okay. If not, then you basically flag it off. Now, after you run this, you can again have a nice CSV file to consume. So I'll be running this, and this will create a new CSV file for consumption. So that way it's useful for further analysis also, because we are getting an output which is in a useful form in a CSV, which you can readily apply or use it subsequently. So again, an easy way to run this, I just hit the play button. And if I go to the folder, it will have created a new file. Yeah. So if you see, it has created a breach underscore result. So if you see the timestamp, this is as of now. So if I simply open this, it's opening. So here, if we see, the breach column has got populated. So this can be a check which can be applied as a part of internal audit, so that if there is a breach, then basically we can raise an audit query saying that as per the business policy, for a client with a certain portfolio size, a X fee has to be charged, but a certain higher fee, let's say a Y fee, has been charged where Y is greater than X. So we can ask business a question why that has been done. because it may happen that they may have some additional work which the client has given to them. So that way they are charging a certain higher fee to the client, etc. There can be various reasons. But that way, through internal audit, we can ask them that question that the fee is not matching as per the policy. So can you explain the rationale behind that? And through this, we can have a one-shot view on the entire portfolio. I don't have to worry about sampling. As I mentioned, even if I have 1,000 clients, I can have the breach list for all the 1,000 clients, and I can simply then do a filter and pick up the clients whereby there is a breach, and I can pass it to business asking for a justification. So this can be one of the applications which I feel could come handy from an internal audit perspective. So any questions on this? Any questions on the first use case? So I just go to the use case in the presentation. Okay. So if you see, as a part of inputs, we have the limit structure and the data dump, which you have written as point A here. And as output, we have the report which shows if a correct or incorrect fee has been applied. So something which can be of value addition to internal audit. Next is what we call as a recon, either a position recon or exposure recon as well. Again, an important activity because recon is something which is done by back office on a daily basis. So we know that every bank or a financial institution has an active back office who is going to do the day-to-day operations. And they require reconciliation because without that, they cannot calculate the daily P&L, which is required as per the business. So for this, reconciliation is something which they may do. Now, they may be either doing it part manually, full manually, or completely automatically. So depending on the sophistication of that particular firm, the reconciliation process can keep on changing. Now, risk management is expected to perform a daily exposure monitoring for a counterparty. Now, this is again a regulatory requirement. So imagine that I'm looking at a certain trading book. Then as a part of my trading book, I would have various products. I could have swaps, options, forward contracts, etc. And for every position, I may be expected to calculate a exposure because that's a regulatory requirement. So those of you familiar with bank audits, there is something which we call as a RCA report. And there is a RCA 3, which is a report which you submit to RBI on a quarterly basis. And RCA 3 is the one which talks about exposure numbers at the end of every quarter. And naturally, banks have to calculate this on a daily basis. But reporting to the RBI through RCA 3 happens through at the end of every quarter. So again, those are exposure numbers. Now, as a part of internal audit application, internal audit teams review whether this kind of reconciliation has happened correctly. Because if not, that would lead to incorrect reporting. Because another place whereby exposure recon is required is whenever now, as a part of banking, every bank is expected to report what we call as the top 10 exposures. So again, this is a regulatory requirement which has to be done on a monthly basis. So this is something which either middle office or risk team would be doing. And they calculate top 10 exposures. So we look at the top 10 clients with whom the bank has maximum business, and we report the exposure numbers, something which will be consumed by regulators subsequently. So again, that is where correct exposure reconciliation or exposure computation is important, because if exposure numbers are incorrect, that means we are filing an incorrect regulatory report, which is risky, which should not be the case, because we cannot be in the breach of what a regulator is asking, regulator or auditor is asking. So as a part of internal audit, most audit teams do a review of this as well, just to ensure that whether all the positions are getting captured and whether the exposure is also getting reconciled correctly. So again, this can be done on any date they require. So either do it on certain sample dates or maybe do it on specific month end or quarter end dates. So again, that is something which is possible and which internal audits do. So as a part of this input, we are using a dump of trade-wise and counterparty-wise exposure. Again, I've prepared a hypothetical data set. I'll open that up as well. And as an output, we'll be giving a couple of reports. One will talk about the reconciliation of the number of trades, that is trades per counterparty. And next is reconciliation of exposure numbers. So yes, and this can be accomplished through Excel as well. You may want to use pivoting, and accordingly, you may want to calculate exposure numbers. But there is a certain degree of risk with that, isn't it? So because there's an operational risk, you have to manually do a few things, updation of data, updation of pivots, etc. And many times in Excel, we may have certain formulas whereby, I mean, you require to track the formulas, use it subsequently as well. And at times it can happen that maybe in a certain section of the Excel, we forget to, or we miss out on dragging a certain formula, which will have an impact on the final result. So if the base formulas are not dragged, so if that data is incorrect, naturally pivots are going to show something which is incorrect. And from a reporting point of view, that could be risky. So in place of that, again, Python is something which can come to your rescue. So the way to do that is just open up a couple of more inputs. I just close the other files which we don't really require. So there's a separate set of files which has been prepared. Yeah, so exposure input. Yeah, so I've just taken a hypothetical exposure report. So I've taken currency-wise exposure for respective counterparties. What are the product types? Then the residual maturity for every trade. What is the notional for the trade? The PFE factors, PFE quantum, then the MTM and final exposure. Again, now these are standard fields which you'll get to see in any exposure monitoring report for a bank or a financial institution. So I've just taken a sample, and they are just hypothetical numbers for example or demonstration purposes. Now I may want to do a reconciliation. That is, for this, I have again written a small snippet of code, something which internal audit function might find helpful. So this is how easily I can do a simple recon. That is, let's say I want to calculate my sum of exposures per counterparty. So I have a set of counterparties here. So I have these hypothetical party names which I have given here. So I think roughly 10 or 12 counterparties. And for every party, I want an exposure value, which I want to quickly review. So maybe risk is reporting a certain exposure number, which I want to quickly check. Also, I may want to know what is the number of trades per, or depending on the product type, how much is the total number of trades. So let's say I talk of swaps, and if I have counterparty XYZ. So I may want to know for counterparty XYZ, what is the total number of swaps which I want to use in my analysis. So again, that is something which can be done in one shot. So there is a group by feature which Python provides. So by group by, you can group it as you like. So here in the first portion, I have grouped it by counterparty. In the second portion, whereby I'm counting the number of trades, I have grouped it by counterparty and product. So again, these are all syntax specific things. So don't get bogged down by the syntax. Let's look at how simple it is to look at the logic. Now, if I run this, this should generate a new file. So if I just hit enter, now this is the file which I'm planning to create. So position recon. So if I run this, I think this has got executed. So let me go back. Yeah. So I've created a position recon and exposure recon. So two files with the current timestamp. So if I had to do a position recon first, let the output open. Now ignore the other columns. I can just format it. I can just drop the other columns and focus on the first three columns. So that's basically my counterparty name. And for every counterparty, for each of the product types, I can have a ready count. So this means access, for counterparty access, the number of swap trades are 78. For FX, it has just 2 trades. So similarly, it is available for every other counterparty as well. So this ID column is going to give me a position recon. So this is like a one-shot activity. I just implement one line of code and that's it. I have the result for consumption. So this is how I can do simple position reconciliation. Next is exposure recon as well. So I may want to know whether my risk team is calculating correct exposures. So these are my individual exposures. So again, you can ignore the first few columns, maybe focus on the first and the last column. You can format the output as you require. I have kept it as it is. I have not dropped these columns as output. It can be done easily. So here, depending on each counterparty, I have an exposure number which is available. So this is just a summation of exposures across the counterparty, and that way I can have a visual as to what is the exposure for a XYZ counterparty. So as a part of internal audit, if I want to verify whether my risk team or middle office has calculated the exposure correctly, I can quickly do this check and see if those exposure numbers tally. If they're not, I can immediately raise an audit query saying that something is amiss. So can you check your processes or maybe check your formulas or files once? So this can be another use case which can be useful to audits. So let me just close files which you don't require so that it keeps the thing simple. Okay. Another example is reading through a PDF file. Now, we use PDF files very, very often because they are one of the most popular ways of reading data. So pick any file. So maybe pick up an annual report or pick any kind of business policy. So we have, every bank has a certain set of policy which is approved by the board, which we call as a board approved policies, or every financial institution has that as well. And all of these policies come in the form of a PDF. So, and then we have to subsequently use that PDF for various things. So maybe I may want to plug in counterparty-wise limits. So these are my exposure limits which are to be plugged in. Or maybe I want to read some table from annual reports. As a part of my analysis, I may want to do that as well, especially from audit perspective, from stat audit or from business valuation. I think this annual reports is something which becomes important. Or maybe there is some internal analysis which can be done by my internal teams, and I have that again as a part of tables which are there in a PDF. Now we know that something which is sitting inside a PDF, so some PDFs will allow you to copy and paste the data directly, but that may not be possible all the time. And the problem is, if you're manually copying and pasting the data from a PDF, there is an operational risk as well, which is associated, because it may so happen that certain numbers in that PDF may not get copied, because you never know what are the properties which have been set to that PDF file, because the creator has the right to set certain properties on the PDF which will allow one to read or copy data or not copy data. So in case, even if you do manage to copy data, you cannot be 100% sure that everything has come in. Then you have to again do a manual check if everything is correct, which is highly inefficient, isn't it? Because imagine that there are 100 rows of data. Imagine it's a table of 100 rows and you're copying and pasting that table in Excel. Now, if you have to again go to the PDF and check line by line, it's a very inefficient approach to do things. So I would not advise that. Again, at the same time, it may so happen that you may be able to paste the data in Excel. So you copy from a PDF and paste it in Excel, but the format is not readable. So many times we observe this is the case. So if in a certain PDF, you copy the data and you paste it, it gives some other format, which is simply not readable. So that can be another problem which you face. And most of these things, they come in PDF because whenever a certain important file, something like a business policy or an organization-wide policy, that is something which has been approved by the board of directors, and we want that file to remain intact, because once you convert something into a PDF, that becomes intact. You simply cannot go and change a PDF separately. So that's the usage of PDFs. That's why we consume PDFs so much. Now, there is a way to read the data of PDFs directly. So there are utilities inside Python which will allow you to do that. So through that, imagine that I have certain counterparty-wise limits which I have to read. So imagine I have a certain bank risk policy, and that bank risk policy defines a limits table. That is, I have counterparties, let's say A, B, C, and D, and for every counterparty, I have a counterparty limit which has been defined. Now, all of these limits will be in sync with your risk appetite or risk tolerance threshold which the bank has defined. Now, all of these things will come inside a PDF file. Now, I may want a quick way to convert that into Excel, which I can subsequently consume, because I don't want to copy and paste the table, because imagine that because I fear that I may miss out on certain data and something might not get copied. So that is something which can be quickly done. So I've prepared a small sample file. Again, for demonstration, I've kept it as a very small file. I can have n number of rows here, and that can run across multiple pages. That's also possible. Now, here I have entity and I have the individual limits which are defined. Now, I want some way to consume this inside Python and then subsequently use it for my analysis. So imagine I want this to be converted into an Excel, which I want to subsequently read. So that's also easily possible to be done. So let's go back to a Jupyter notebook. Okay. And yeah, so this section. So a couple of interesting libraries, so PyPDF and Tabula. So again, something which is specific to reading of PDF files. So again, this is one small code snippet which helps me to read data from a PDF file, and I'm simply displaying it here. So let me just run this. Okay. So it shows other information as well, that is who is the creator, what is the date of creation, etc. So all of these specifics come as well. You can ignore this. Now the point of interest here is the below table. Now I have entity and I have the limits. And once I have such a table available, I can immediately convert this into a Excel as well. So let me see if I have done that to CSV. Okay, if not, I mean, that can be easily done. So even if I do df.pandas.to_CSV. So imagine that I want a CSV type of an output. Let me just copy this path and just change the file name. So let's give this as sample.csv. Df, this should be df.to_CSV. Okay, so if I just run this, this should create a new CSV file. Okay, I think some syntactical error. My apologies. Okay, so this would have created a new CSV file now. All right. So this is how I can get the output inside an Excel as well. Now, once I have these kind of limits, it becomes very easy for my analysis as well. So that way, I am completely overcoming the problem of operational risk, because I don't have to manually copy and paste things. I can have Python to read off the PDF. I can safely convert that into an Excel and directly consume it safely. And this will ensure I do not miss any of the data which is sitting inside the PDF. So again, a handy functionality which can come useful on projects. So maybe let's run through the examples, and then maybe we can take questions if any. Next is an interesting example. So something which even business teams will find very, very useful, not just internal audit. That has something to do with forecasting models. So either forecasting or estimation, because we know that when we talk of an internal audit function, that way the kind of activities are pretty flexible. So it depends on the management or the client's management to decide what all things they want to cover under the gamut of internal audit. So it may not be just maybe exposure numbers or reports which you're submitting. Now the business team may go a step ahead, and they may request internal audit to review the kind of models which are being used by business as well. So I don't call it an exact model validation per se, because for validation you have separate teams, but they may want audit to take a separate or an independent view on how or on whether exactly the models which they have developed is right, and whether it's safe to consume those models in practice, or do they find any issues. So that can be one of the things with forecasting. So maybe think from a manufacturing company's point of view. So now for a manufacturing company, we are going to be dependent on inventories, because consider a manufacturing firm which will consume a certain inventory, it will process the inventory, and it will produce a certain finished good or a finished product. Now that is going to finally be sold to the market, which will drive the sales for the company. Now we know that whenever a company is purchasing inventory, that implies that its cash is getting, or its funds are getting locked in that inventory, isn't it? Because whatever inventory has been procured, the 100% of the inventory may not be consumed immediately. Now, whenever a business procures inventory, some portion will be sitting in the warehouse and other portion will be consumed for its business applications or for production of the final product. Whereas the other inventory will be sitting idle in the warehouse. Now, funds which are locked inside the inventory are honestly the funds which the business cannot use for its core business operations. So the core business services are to be offered. That is something for which that fund is not available, because those funds get trapped in the inventory. So most manufacturing companies, what they go in is they try to do a JIT type of a logic. So which we call as a just-in-time procurement of inventories. So just-in-time procurement of inventories implies that we are maintaining only that much balance of inventories which is required by the business for generating a certain or meeting a certain sales demand. That is, we do not keep our funds locked in, but rather we ensure that only a certain amount of inventory is available, so that my business continues unhampered. At the same time, I do not have too much of idle inventory on hand. That is, I'm not really wasting any of my funds which will be locked into the inventory which is just sitting idle. So that's what we call as a JIT. Now, normally for businesses are going to either have a regression or a time series analysis model. So when I say a regression, this will be mainly polynomial regression. So when I say polynomial regression, it could look something like this. So maybe if it's a quadratic, you could have something like ax square plus bx plus c. I'm just taking a simple example, a hypothetical equation. But this is what we call as a polynomial regression. Why polynomial? Because, so firstly, why regression? Because y is my dependent variable and all of these x's are my independent variables. So whenever you read anything pertaining to regression, you generally see something like y as a function of x. So this is the meaning of this. So y is dependent on x. So, and why this is a quadratic function? Because I have a certain higher level term in x. That is, x has been raised to a power which is more than 1. So that's why we call it as a quadratic. And quadratic is just a type of a polynomial. And this is one of the ways in which businesses might want to build a certain forecasting engine. That is, let's say, based on the sales data. So imagine I have access to historical sales data, which I can consume. And based on that sales data, I may want to build a regression model which will help me estimate what is the sales number at the next time period. So maybe I have a month-end sales data which is available, and I want to forecast what could be the next month-end sales data. And based on that, I may want to manage my inventory procurement. So for that, I can either have a polynomial regression or a time series analysis model. So again, this is something which a business can request internal audit to review. So either now depends on how much they want audit teams to review this. Either they want them to review the entire model, or maybe the model assumptions, or review whether the model outputs have been consumed. So it depends on the business lookout how exactly they want IA to consume this. So as a part of this simple example, we have taken a sales data. So imagine this is like a time series data. Imagine I have monthly data of sales which is available. And as a part of output, I'm trying to build a time series model, which will help me estimate what will be the next period's sales forecast. Because based on that, I want to decide how much should be my inventory procurement to be in sync with my JIT requirement or just-in-time requirement. So there are various time series models which are available. And again, time series is a very, very valuable skill set whenever it comes to estimation or forecasting type of analysis. And ARIMA happens to be one of the models which can be used. So ARIMA stands for Auto Regressive Integrated Moving Average. So again, slightly heavy terms, but honestly, it's not a very difficult model. What I'm trying to do is, in a layman terms, let's say I have my time series. Let's say Y is my variable, which is my time series variable. When I say time series, I have just two axes. One is the time axis, and next is the variable axis. So let's say this is YT1. Let's say this is YT2, YT3, and YT4. So let's say this is a very small snapshot of my time series. Now, what my ARIMA model essentially does is it tries to understand, or it tries to make an estimate, that is on T5, what could be the potential sales. Imagine this Y is nothing but the sales information. So these are my historical numbers, and this is the estimation which I want to come up with. So looking at these numbers, I try to estimate what would be this 5th month sales estimation. So, so something which I can subsequently consume. So this is all that ARIMA model does. So there are nitty-gritties which go into ARIMA, that is deciding on how exactly you fit the ARIMA model, etc. So that is something which we'll take in a separate forum, because time series by itself can take 2 to 3 hours to discuss. So we'll not get into those details, but definitely we'll see an output for this model. That is something which I had worked on one of my earlier projects. So this is my use case. I want to, so my business is keen to know whether the model which has been developed is, whether it is worthy to be consumed by business, or does it require some enhancements. So that's what I'm trying to assess through the internal audit step. So allow me to go to Jupyter Notebook once. Sorry. Yeah, so this is my time series model. So I have developed a ARIMA model, and just ignore the nitty-gritties here. So there's something called as ACF, PSCF, plot, AD, fuller, etc. All of these things are specific to time series. So those of you who are interested on the time series analysis bit, I would definitely request that go through ARIMA. It's a very interesting model to go through, and it's a very handy model as well. So what I've done is I have constructed ARIMA model here. It's not very difficult. I mean, you see too many things which have gone in. These syntactically may look very, very challenging, but it's not very difficult, to be honest. It's just simple syntax, because I've done a lot of charting and plotting here as well. So let me run this simple code. So ignore these warnings. So these warnings have to do something with the version which I'm using. So they say that certain version will not support this model going ahead, so request you to switch. So you can ignore this orange section. But this is my output. So again, something which you see in Excel as well. Of course, in Excel, building a ARIMA model can be very, very painful. But with Python, it's comparatively easy. So if I scroll down, these are the so this is the charting and plotting which I was talking about. So this is how easy it becomes to chart and plot numbers. That way I can simply copy and paste any figure I want. So here, if you see, if I do a simple right click, I can just say a copy image and I can just paste it somewhere. So again, that is how easy it gets. And I mean, that's how convenient with Python, you can pick and paste anything. And all of these are further analysis which I have done on the time series. And this is the forecast. So if you see, as a part of my forecasting estimation, this is something which internal audit might want to do. That is, they have a certain base value which is given. So if you see the orange colored line, this is my base data. So I've taken sales data as the input, and this blue colored line is my estimation. So this is how I may want to fit my model to see whether that model is behaving decent enough or does it require certain enhancements. So maybe as a part of audit, we may want to review whether the parameters which have been used to fit the model, they are right or wrong. So when I say the parameters, if I just scroll up for a minute, it is these parameters. Sorry. Yeah. So if you see this 111, these are actually model specific parameters. So something to do with order of differencing, etc. So let's not get into those details, but this is something which internal audit might want to verify. Along with that, they may also want to verify the approach, because that is also equally important, isn't it? Because just checking the result is one thing, but understanding the approach to that result is also equally important, because many a times it can happen that there are compensating errors. That is, the final result is fine, but in between there are compensatory errors which is resulting in the final number matching the requirement. But if we dig deep, we can find there are issues in those individual sub-modules. So as a part of internal audit, this can be an expectation that, yes, you are expected to definitely check the final result. But along with that, we also want you to review whether the approach is decent enough, whether it is correct, or if you find any gaps in this. So this can be another thing which might have to be tested. So again, this is a simple data visualization which can be easily accomplished. So going back, just a couple of more use cases and we'll be done. Also, and we have ALM teams which are very, very active whenever it comes to overall liquidity, or what we call as balance sheet management for a bank. Now, as a part of ALM, they calculate key reports, which we call as a LCR, or a liquidity coverage ratio, or NSFR, which we call the net stable funding ratio, etc., which is computed on a daily basis. Again, these are some things which have to be tested from time to time. So internal audit's responsibility is to check at ad hoc points in time whether these numbers are correct, because these are regulatory numbers. In case there is any mistake, and the regulator can start or initiate a regulatory action, something which no bank wants. So this can be a check which can be again done through Python. So using a various set of libraries which are available, we can leverage the power of Python. Because the thing is, whenever we are talking from ALM point of view, we have data which is flowing in from a variety of systems. So we can either have Calypso or Murex supplying maybe my portfolio information. Then maybe my accounting entries are getting generated through Finacle, FlexCube. So GL, etc. is coming through Finacle or FlexCube. Then I have maybe some collateral information which my back office is giving. Then risk or valuations team is giving me with the valuation numbers for government securities or any securities which are sitting in the LCR calculation. Now, there is a significant amount of operational risk which is involved here, because one needs to ensure that whether all the data is getting collected and being used correctly. Now, as a part of Excel, yes, you can do that, but it's a very operationally risky thing, because that way you have to manually check whether those individual cells have been updated and whether it's fetching the right data. Even if you miss one thing, it can have an impact on the final result. So in that place, again, Python is something which can help you, because Python will help you drag the numbers from all of these respective systems. And that is something which can be collated together and a report can be prepared. So something which internal audit can use for assessment purposes. So again, this is another application. Next is reviewing of RBS data points. So again, as a part of banking RBS, which we call as a risk-based supervision, this is something which regulators expect. So this is a quarterly report which has to be submitted to the RBI by every scheduled commercial bank. And RBS data basically compiles all of the quarterly numbers for various parameters which are pertaining to the bank's portfolio, which have to be submitted to the RBI. Again, before the numbers go to the regulator, internal audit generally quickly reviews that as well, maybe on a sampling basis for now. But tomorrow, with big data coming in, you may want to review the entire thing once. Because any kind of mistakes or any kind of errors in RBS reporting are not acceptable. So something which are seen as a regulatory breach. So as a part of internal audit function, we may want to use Python in order to review the data before it gets submitted to the regulator, just to ensure that all of the numbers are in sync and they're matching with our portfolio values. So that is something whereby Python can come handy as well. Next is tallying of collateral amounts. So again, collateral is important because whenever we talk of from a trading or even from a lending perspective, the client will be posting a certain collateral with the bank or a financial institution or the lender in general. So back office is something who collates collateral numbers and they consume those collateral numbers for various calculations. So as a part of internal audit, we may be requested to review whether the collateral numbers which back office is giving and something which risk management is consuming for reporting, are they in sync or not? If there is any gaps, internal audit can immediately flag off saying that this is a gap which we have found. So request you to check the processes, etc. So that is another place whereby Python can be used. So just extending our examples which we have discussed. So using simple NumPy and Pandas, and we can do this simple check as well. And again, a quick check. So that way I can take my entire client portfolio and check the collateral against every client. So that way I don't have to worry about sampling. I simply check it on the population. So this can be another application. Now also, those firms who may be currently relying on Excel, they may find it beneficial to move their legacy systems onto a certain database and Python model. So Python and an enterprise database model. Because that way, once you move things onto a database, now there are many open source database available as well. So something like SQLite, something for which you don't have to pay anything. You can simply download and start using it. So that way, you're able to move your legacy data from Excel onto SQLite or any other open source database. And the advantage is data which is sitting inside a database is much more robust. Because honestly, Excel has not been designed for storage of data. It should not be done. Because Excel, we know, has its own problems by itself. Your file may go corrupt, or maybe certain formulas may fail, or they do not get updated, which can be very risky. In place of that, we can have a proper repository, something like a database, something which can be used for storing of the actual data or actual business data. And that is stored in a very systematic manner so that there are no mistakes. And that way that data remains on the database. You can use any kind of advanced analytics which you require, or even simple forecasting, something like a time series model which you want to build. You can easily work with databases. Also, retrieval of data becomes very, very easy. So let's say if someone wants to quickly get ad hoc information about a certain date, through Python, we can simply write a small query. We can query the database and get the required data in one stroke. So that's how convenient it gets. Now, in general, from an internal audit perspective, I feel following are the points which can add value to the overall IA exercise. So one is optimization of activities done by internal audit. So maybe there can be certain processes which can be optimized or which can be enhanced, which can basically speed up or give more confidence to the overall internal audit activity. So that's where technology, so things like Python can come handy. Next is automation of recurrent activities. Again, automation is something which is always preferred in most of the cases. So even if you see the BCBS guidelines, the Basel guidelines, they also talk about using automation as much as possible to manage the operational risk. So many times whenever we have recurrent activities, we can easily have an engine which can be automated and which will quickly give us the results without exposing us to any kind of operational errors. Then better visualizations is something which you already seen. So visualization can be quickly and easily done. That's not a problem at all. And there can be flexibility. So flexibility to data analytics or reports which are required either by regulators or we want to stay in sync with best practices. So tomorrow, if regulator comes up with a new requirement, no need to worry at all because Python is very, very flexible. So as long as the bank or the lender or any institution has that data which is available, we can consume that data and process it in any way required. And that way we are in sync with the regulatory guidelines. So that can be one more application. Now, we use Python frequently for our client projects as well. So, in case you feel that we'll be able to add value, then a quick review of the things which I have done on Python personally, as well as part of my earlier projects. So, personally, I spent close to 7 years on Python, and I've been using it extensively as a part of during my time in the industry, as well as when I started out by myself as well. And a few applications where I have frequently used Python is mainly model development, model validations, reporting, automations, etc. So not an exhaustive list, but once we know what the logic is to be implemented, we can easily deliver it through Python. So that can be done. Also, having spent time in the BFSI space and consulting space for some time, we do have fair bit of idea as to the regulatory landscape. So something which we can support from an internal audit or stat audit perspective, that is something which can be done. So maybe in case any firm is looking to leverage technology, we can also help IA adopt AI. So IA is internal audit and AI is artificial intelligence. So maybe if this adoption is required, that can be done as well. And I would say in general, it's always an advantage to push towards open source because firstly, it has its own advantages as we just discussed. And that usage is only going to grow with time because no one wants to purchase too much of licensed software, isn't it? Because every time we purchase a license, we end up paying something for usage of that. It can either be a yearly license or a one-shot fee. But if we can do something similar in open source, then why not? And it will save a lot of licensing costs, not just for your companies, but even for your respective clients. So in case you're delivering a project for the client, if they move on to open source, then naturally that saves them a lot of licensing fees as well. And that way, open source, they can freely use the way they like, either for their core businesses or even for reporting purposes. So any questions on the use cases which we discussed, or any places where you feel that, or would you like to discuss scenarios whereby Python can come handy, or whether you would want to verify if Python could be useful in a certain scenario, or any questions in general as well. We can take any questions which the audience may have.
Yeah, so you all can post the questions in the chat box. Okay, I believe, Ameya, it was such a good session.
Hello.
I think someone has a question, I think, yeah.
Yeah, please.
Hello, yeah, someone had a question, is it? I heard a hello, so I thought, so sorry,
sir,
madam, I stopped.
Sir, there are, Ameya sir.
Yes, sir.
हाँ सर, दे रहा सर. चैट में देखो सर, आपको दिया मैंने सर क्वेश्चन.
Okay. We can post that.
मिला सर?
Okay. Yeah. Now I can see. So application developed. Okay, yeah. So there is a question pertaining to data security or information security. So again, a very valid question. So thanks for bringing it up. This is a question which comes up many a time when we talk from open source. But what we generally do is whenever we are building such open source tools, they sit behind the organization's firewalls. So we know that every firm has a cyber security which comes through the firewalls which they have. And behind the firewalls, we have this open source thing which is running. So that way it protects against any kind of data leaks. That is, no one can access that open source tool. So when I say open source, that Python as a tool is something which is open source. Now, how you want to use that tool, that is completely depending on our requirements. And once we can ensure that they are sitting within our organization's firewalls, we don't have to worry about security because no one can breach the firewall and use our open source tools. So that is one. And about versioning, So about the versioning thing, the thing is we don't have to again worry about versions because Python versions are compatible. So that way we have a backward compatibility. So in case something is, so in case a certain version is being consumed, it will have compatibility with the earlier versions as well. So that way compatibility is not a problem. As I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, मिश्रा जी और कोई क्वेश्चन है?
नहीं सर, बस एक ही क्वेश्चन था सर.
Yeah.
सर एक ही क्वेश्चन था सर.
Yeah, fair,
Yes,
fair.
sir.
Neha madam, you can,
Okay, thank you, Ketan sir. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and I would like to thank Mr. Ameya for such an insightful session today. And we actually learned about so many new concepts. And as I said, data is a new oil, and IA should move to IA. So that's what a very good thing which Mr. Ameya told us. And yes, in terms of affordable technology, organizations are actually moving towards open source now because it's a very affordable technology. So thanks a lot, Mr. Ameya, for updating us on this. And also, the very good part of the session was the use cases. So many use cases which we have seen in terms of how to use Python, and IA can very well adopt to this. And in terms of moving from sample testing to continuous monitoring, it would be very helpful. And I would like to thank all the participants also for making this session successful. A very big thanks to all of you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ameya.
Thank you so much. Thank you, madam, and thanks for all the participants. Thanks for having me over. It was great to speak with every one of you. And of course, my contact details are here. So in case anyone would like to get in touch, I'll be happy to speak. In case you want have any further questions, we can definitely freeze on the time and talk. No problem.
Thank you, Ameya, once again, and Neha madam, to you also, an entire team of IIA for having this wonderful program of 2 days. I'm sure our members would have benefited out of this program, those who have attended, and we look forward for such more program. And Ameya, we also look forward to you for some technical sessions on bank audit or something like that. We'll definitely be in touch with you.
Definitely, sir.
Thank
you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening and a good weekend ahead as well.